Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to our weekly Where Are All the Women stream. They're right here, so now people can stop asking. I'm here with Mary Lou Singleton, as always, and our special guest, Trish Wood of the Trish Wood is Critical podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Trish.
Happy to do it. I am up late for me, though, so we keep moving it along.
We're going to have to keep things exciting over here, otherwise she'll fall asleep. Yeah. I want to remind people, as always, to like and subscribe. I was informed that there's a dog biting my hand. Sorry, I'll stop playing with it and focus on the task at hand. I was informed that people are being unsubscribed against their will, and also that nobody gets notifications of the videos and going live. I'm shadow banned on YouTube, so I suspect that has something to do with it.
I'm sorry.
I mean, it's not as bad as Meta. Meta's the worst. I don't know how you both have fared on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm completely shadow banned on Facebook and pretty shadow banned on Instagram.
I am on Twitter badly, and I can't. I'm going to have to make an appeal to Caesar because I'm going to have to go, I think, directly to Elon because nothing is changing. It's not there. He's taking the boot off a whole bunch of people who are way more provocative than me. Yeah. And everybody says, I never see your tweets anymore. Where have you been? Why haven't you been on Twitter? And I say, well, I tweet 4 or 5, 6, 7 times a day and people don't see it. So that's it's very disheartening when you're using Twitter to push work, push your Substack or your podcast or something, and you're not getting engagement. It's upsetting. So I'm going to have to get an email for him and beg for him to sort out whatever algorithm is putting me in jail.
How did you figure out that you were shadow banned? Just because people
say they never see my tweets. They never, and there are people who look for me, and they, like Ann Bauer, kind of my girlfriends, like Jennifer Say, and some of the women on Twitter that tweet every day, and we know each other, and they say we just don't see it anymore. So it's very upsetting. Yeah,
it's hard for me to tell who I'm supposed to be seeing and who I'm not, because I'm always in the algorithm is giving me what the algorithm thinks I want. But then there's also people on, I know that Posey Parker, for example, like even if I type in her handle, it doesn't come up, and Graham Linehan too. Like they're both really, really shadow banned. Like, like you can't search for them. You'd have to, like, I can never find their profiles. I mean, I can find them eventually, but it takes me so much work to get there. And it's
see, that's so funny you would mention him, because he's someone I like very much and enjoy what he does. So I now that you've mentioned his name, I realize I haven't seen any of his tweets. I follow him. I haven't seen any of his tweets, like in weeks. I'd forgotten about him being alive in the world, even, because I haven't seen his tweets. So that's what they do to us. We've been depersoned or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so frustrating. And it's frustrating, of course, because like as individuals and individual journalists, I hate the term content creators, but people who are trying to put media out into the world and who don't have institutional backing, albeit by choice. There's so little that you can do about it. Like I would have no idea how to resolve the Meta issue or the YouTube issue. I don't think there is anything I can do, to be honest.
Well, and the sad part of it is too, I might get in trouble for saying this, and it might also sound kind of bitter and resentful, and that's okay. But in the last 4 years, since you've been doing this way longer than me, Megan, but in the last 4 years, and now that COVID is kind of ending, it's not really over because of the wreckage left behind, but the acute event is sort of past. There is a hierarchy too, and so a lot of people who are way more famous than me, and who have bigger podcasts anyway, but were being shadow banned or in trouble constantly, they've been completely freed. And they spend a lot of time talking about how great Elon is as well, right? There's a lot of bootlicking going on Twitter right now. And I can't sort of do it. Like, I'm grateful for what he's doing, but he's also doing stuff that really bugs me, including shadow banning me and other people still. So it's kind of turned into its own ugly little high school playground where there's the sort of powerful Fonzie guy, namely Elon, who can give people fairy dust. And the thing about it now that's so very real is that having a high profile on Twitter makes money for you. And now they have this thing where they send you checks if a lot of people subscribe and you've got people are making a ton of money. But the people making money are all people who spend a lot of time saying how great Elon is and how grateful they are that he's the god of free speech, etc.
Well, and they're mostly men, as far as I can tell. Also,
mostly men.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. It is.
It's a very bro-y club over there. I'm grateful to be back on Twitter.
Twitter
because
bros.
I love Twitter. Yeah. I really do. I love Twitter. I think I'm the only person who ever says that. I don't know if everybody else genuinely hates it or they just say they hate it, but I love Twitter. It's like my favorite.
I have moments and I like it more than I should. But I also know when I should jump off of it because I get in pissing matches with people. And then I'm like, what am I doing? It's like, I don't even know this guy. Like, why am I, But I like it too. And it is a main news source for me. And it's important, obviously, because people are talking about stuff that nobody else is talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots that I like about it. The guys who are making a lot of money, like I'm still not allowed to have a subscribe button there for no apparent reason. It's been almost a year since I applied for one. I monetized, but I mean, I hardly make anything, but it's just, and then I know that there are people making a lot of money off of Twitter, but they're all dudes. And as far as I can tell, everyone that's gotten their own X show is a man. It's just like they only can hear themselves. Like they can't hear female voices, even if it's in type.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's true. It's true.
Yeah. But anyway, so, I mean, first of all, for those just tuning in, this is Trish Wood of the Trish Wood is Critical podcast. I've linked to her website and her Substack down below in the show notes on YouTube. And you should all go there and subscribe. She's doing work that no one else is doing, especially around the fallout from the Freedom Convoy and the ways that the leaders of the convoy, and in some cases just people who were involved in the convoy, are being punished by the government still. And Mary Lou, of course, is also on Substack, and I've linked to her Substack in the show notes below. And her podcast is How I Healed. And enchantedfamilymedicine.com is your website. Is that correct, Mary Lou?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. And if you're in the live chat, please feel free to ask questions. If you want me to for sure see the questions, please use the super chat because I can't keep track of everything very closely. But I mean, it's 2024 now. So how are we feeling? Good, bad, angry?
I really, one of my biggest concerns is I'm going to die angry about it. I'm worried I'm so mad every day still about all the COVID authoritarianism. And right before I logged into the StreamYard today for this, I just had a Facebook argument with someone who was telling me there was never actually a lockdown and no one was forced to get the vaccine. So it's not getting better for me. I'm still so mad.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this tweet from Jagmeet Singh, who is an NDPer, just last night, and it was just like livid. I mean, and it's like you would think that at this point we'd all be used to the reality, which is that these people are full of shit, essentially, but I'm not used to it. I think that I can't even be as cynical as I should be, despite my cynicism. And so he had tweeted, the average Canadian CEO earns in one shift what the average worker in Canada makes in an entire year. By 9:27 a.m. this morning, this was yesterday, CEOs have earned more than you, the average worker, will earn this entire year. While inflation crushes Canadians, greedy CEOs help fuel it. As if he's like pro-worker and anti-CEO. And, you know, he was a big supporter, one of the first supporters in the NDP of the vaccine mandates that would see federal workers fired if they didn't get vaccinated. So, you know, lots and lots of literally working class people across Canada, and of course lots of working class people across Canada did lose their jobs for refusing to get vaccinated, for what, as far as I can tell, was, you know, a money grab on the part of big pharma. That's what I think the main incentive for the mandates were. I don't know if you two agree with that.
Well, he's also a bit of a Rolex watch guy too, so much for his, you know, credibility as an advocate for the working man. But the NDP just isn't that anyway. I mean, it's just a fallacy to think that they actually give a shit about working people. And here's the truth of that, just to talk about the convoy, which is one of my favorite subjects, obviously, is that it was, in fact, the working people, the beautiful blue-collar working people in this country that figured it out really fast. And when they figured it out, they didn't muck about. They didn't start a podcast like I did. They didn't, you know, write a Substack like we all do. They said, screw it, we're going to Ottawa and we're going to do something about it. And it's kind of interesting because for me, I had a feeling of, okay, the cavalry's coming finally after all this time. And in Ontario, which was particularly bad, where the government here just handed the keys to the province to the public health people, who are some of the worst hall monitor chicks in the world. These people, like, just like rule keeping, super observant people who want to keep us all, you know, doing the right thing every possible minute. And they handed them the keys to our lives, and we never had any recourse. That was the thing for me, and why the trucker movement became so important as a working class movement, because I was sitting in my apartment in Midtown thinking, well, how do we get out of this now? What is the government? What is the institution we use to hold government to account to stop what is clearly a massive public health mistake? It's killing people. My own son, we've talked about this openly before, and he's okay with it because he thinks it helps people. My own son relapsed on a very bad drug problem, nearly died. I had him here in the apartment trying to keep him alive till we could get him into fucking rehab. I went into a major spiraling depression over just being locked down and not being able to live my life and not seeing any way out. And so when the courts began rejecting every lawsuit, I thought the courts will get us out. This can't get out. Court, and they wouldn't. Every lawsuit, no matter how good the data, the evidence, the plaintiff in the case lost. And that was the moment when the truckers came in. It was right about that time. And if you ever wonder why people were on those overpasses the way they were, I believe I was not alone in my feelings of absolute terror that we were under this authoritarian regime, and that there was literally not a pillar of our democracy, especially legacy media, who were going to get us out of it. So when they came the way they did, with this clear thinking, right? There was no gobbledygook, clear thinking about what was wrong and what was right and what we were entitled to as citizens. It really, really hit a chord. So just to carry on from what you said about being angry, which I still am, the way that ended was very hard on the country, with the frozen bank accounts and this sort of jackboot on the necks of these lovely Canadians. But now we live in this state of cognitive dissonance around what just happened. You have Francis Collins. There's a clip on Twitter from last week where Francis Collins was on stage being interviewed by some sycophants, and he said, essentially that they did not do a risk-benefit ratio for any of the non-pharmaceutical interventions, right? That is the underbelly. That is the bedrock of all science and medicine. Is this going to do more harm than the problem it's going to fix is going to do? You got to weigh those things, right? Standards. They didn't do any of that. The lockdowns were a huge, huge experiment. And now we know, we saw it in my own family and elsewhere, thousands of addicts died. Many people committed suicide. Kids lost years of school and never get it back. The economy's crushed. And we're all just a little bit off. I'm still not all the way back from whatever psyop happened to us during those times. So for Francis Collins, who ran the NIH, to sit up there and kind of say, well, that was our big mistake, we didn't do that, in a kind of an oops way. And then he ended the statement by saying it was really unfortunate. Like, that is the understatement of the millennium, right? It was unfortunate. And one of the people interviewing him said, yeah, well, they were collateral damage. Like, this was a war and they killed a bunch of civilians, but they didn't mean to. I mean, it was the most astonishing thing I've ever heard, and very, very close to a confession. And yet, and I think we share the ongoing anger is because it did not, aside from a few truly enlightened COVIDian dissidents, it didn't get the response that it should have, which is, wow, you guys, that was malpractice. That was maybe even negligent homicide, if you look at it clearly, right? So that's kind of where I am. I don't feel it lifting. It's relentless. There's always some new insult to my moral framework of the world.
Right. Because, and I think for me, part of what I continue to get really angry about is that we're still being gaslit. So the people who were so, vitriolic and, and really worse than vitriolic, suggesting that the unvaccinated should be second-class citizens, maybe that they should die, that obviously they shouldn't be able to participate in public life, which is just a really horrific, and it should be illegal to lay that punishment on anyone in a democratic free society, which supposedly we live in, but I don't really think so anymore. These people now won't be accountable. They'll mostly just say, we didn't know. We were just working with the information that we had. We didn't know any better.
Remember that poll in the US that 65% of registered Democrats believed that the people who didn't want to vaccinate should have their children taken away. 65% of registered Democrats. And then, part of the gaslighting too, and Francis Collins says he didn't know. You know who did a cost-benefit analysis? Sweden. The paragon of socialized medicine, who before 2020 had been held up by US leftists as the example of a social democracy they wanted to live in with the best healthcare system in the world. Their public health experts did a cost-benefit analysis, and they realized this is already global. It's in so many countries. There's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. This is going to move through our population. They basically instituted from the beginning what the Great Barrington Declaration authors had asked for, which is focus protection, protect the vulnerable, and told their citizens, we're all going to get it, buck up. It's not going to be as bad as World War II, right? Like that was their attitude. We have to get through this, which was the truth. And their children are not suffering the way the lockdown countries' youth have suffered. Their numbers of COVID deaths were similar to better than the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting too, that they say that we couldn't know. I will just say clearly and definitively that is absolute garbage, because we did know a whole bunch of things in March. And this is on my Substack. I wrote this in March of 2020. Lockdowns will fail. This is going to be a really bad situation. They're not looking at the data. They're not doing risk benefit. And the difference in risk from a young person who's healthy and an old person who's not is light years. And they're not talking. We had all of that information. John Ioannidis had we had all with the Diamond Princess cruise data was really good data, showed how stratified it was. It was all there for the taking, all of it. And somehow they got off on this trajectory of nonsense. Let's not forget the Neil Ferguson study that predicted like 2.2 million people were going to, preposterous, bad modeling that didn't stand up to any kind of scrutiny at all. So they were believing the drama, and they were ignoring the actual quite good early data that said it wasn't the kind of threat that they thought that it was. And that with that data, they could have crafted a plan like the Great Barrington Declaration that would have protected the vulnerable and let everybody else go on about their lives. But remember, they were even poo-pooing natural immunity. right?
Absolutely.
They just wanted, it had to be a crazy thing. And I'll tell you that Roman Baber said this to me, and I kind of knew it was true, but he said for politicians, once you scare people in order to get them to go into lockdown without hating the politicians have to keep locking them down, or the people will think they're being irresponsible. So they created this political problem for themselves that they couldn't get out of, right? And I think he's right about that. I think it's a good analysis of the ongoing stupidity.
Right, because otherwise they'd have to admit that the lockdowns don't work and that it was never necessary in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And they never say we blew it anymore. No one says that anymore, right? Ever.
Oh, and no one talks about, remember cloth masking, the inanity of the cloth masks. Yeah. And I know I fixate on this so much, but it's burned in my mind. The governor of New Mexico, where I live, giving a press conference in June of 2020, wagging her fingers at us, telling us we're all not following the rules. We have to mask up, while she herself is wearing a crocheted mask.
It's just like
with a duck on it.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm feeling like, she's just mocking us at this point. They're just mocking us, but the idiocy of it, and then seeing the children chewing holes in the middle of their masks, like 4 and 5-year-olds trying to keep a mask on, and people still pushing it, thinking it's doing anything.
Do you think this all kind of went, sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it because I know that there was a number of different factors at play, but do you think that the main push behind all of this was that it was about big pharma profits? Because to me, that makes sense in terms of why they would say that ivermectin doesn't work and it's a horse dewormer and anyone who takes it is stupid. And I remember them even trying to say that it was dangerous and people were overdosing on ivermectin. Yeah. And then the fact that they poo-pooed, as you said, natural immunity, and they, they suppressed information about the benefits of vitamin D. And of course, then said everybody needed to get vaccinated or they would die, including children, which we knew wasn't true. I feel like we did know pretty early on who was at risk of dying of COVID, which was people who were obese, people had diabetes, comorbidities, essentially the elderly, and that everybody else would fare okay. And to me, that just sort of reeks of, this is just about big pharma trying to make a bunch of money.
Well, I think that's part of it. And I think that the big pharma part of it comes from guys like Tony Fauci, because that's his MO, right? He was doing that during AIDS, the same. Doesn't want to repurpose old medicine. He wanted desperately a vaccine and pushed that for years, and there still isn't one. Like they still haven't figured that out yet, right? And people died because he would not endorse certain already on the market products like Bactrim, which were saving lives in clinical practice, and he just wouldn't endorse. I know this because I had a big fight with him at the NIH about it in the early 1990s. He wasn't sort of expecting this little chick from Canada to come down there and beat him up a bit, but and I wish I had that video now. I wish it doesn't exist. But it was about Bactrim stopping pneumocystis pneumonia as a prophylaxis, and he wouldn't endorse it even though there was good clinical data. And from the time we had that discussion until the time he finally put the word out that they could use it, I think it was something like 17,000 young gay men had died of PCP. So, so that's him. So just to Megan's point, I think that the big pharma piece is from the high ups, but we have to figure out how do we explain how our own family doctors started acting like nutcases? Like there's a whole bunch of levels of mass hysteria in groups here and of groupthink and something else I can't quite figure out, but people were really acting who should have known better. They were acting like they were nuts, I thought.
Right. That's the really distressing and terrifying part, more so than thinking there's a ruling class wanting to exploit us and sell us medications that we may or may not need. What I witnessed with my colleagues in medicine was terrifying. Again, starting with the cloth masks. And knowing all of us, we've all done N95 fit testing. We have all taken airborne precaution trainings. We all know a piece of cloth over your face is not going to do anything to stop a virus.
Yeah.
We know that. And they fell for it and policed each other, and anyone who was critical of it was threatened with loss of livelihood. Then moving on to just the level of certainty. Remember how not just medical people, but suddenly all your friends were experts in virology, and they were just parroting the propaganda they had heard last night on NPR or the CDC, and dealing with that of knowing no one knows anything with this brand new virus that just hit the scene. There's literally no long-term data, and sitting and being told that I need to be shut up and be quiet because I'm saying there is no certainty. I need to trust the experts, and people pretending to have this level of certainty in a situation that's brand new to humanity. The same with the vaccine. A 6-week study is done, and suddenly everyone says, oh, it's safe in the long term. Of course, we know that it's safe long term. Over and over again, watching that terrifying behavior, it changed me. It left me really, really suspicious of everyone who fell for this, really jaded, really different than I was before.
Yeah, I mean, it really tore people apart. It tore families apart. It obviously tore friends apart. Kim in the comments says, I used to work in a school. Teachers are among the most conformist. They would not question anything. They all posted things like follow the science, which I think I had already been, sorry to offend anybody who's watching who is a teacher, but I lost respect for teachers. Obviously not every single teacher, but teachers by and large, over both the gender identity stuff and then the COVID stuff. I mean, teachers, at least in BC, they didn't want to go back to work. So they were claiming that it was dangerous, like as though it were a health hazard for them to go back to work. And they screwed so many kids over because they wanted to stay home. And I don't think that for the most part that had to do with concerns about health. Certainly it wasn't about concerns for the kids. And, it's like these are the people that we're supposed to be treating as heroes. Teachers are heroes, and they're raising, they shouldn't be raising the next generations. I mean, and that's a problem that I suppose I never started thinking about until recently, which is that teachers actually play way too big of a role in kids' lives nowadays, and they're doing a really bad job.
And it's much harder to respect them now that they literally declared themselves non-essential.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and talk about human shields, right? I mean, that's what the kids were, because the kids had literally, I mean, I've forgotten the name of the Johns Hopkins researcher who was looking for cases of healthy children who died of COVID, and he couldn't find one, not one, right? So the kids were fine. The schools were closed. And I kept saying to Jay Bhattacharya, who we kind of started on this journey early together, which was kind of great because he's so smart and he really helped me understand things. But I used to say, like, well, why don't they bring the kids in for school and socialization, and the teacher can appear on the screen? If the teachers are too scared to go in there, they can stay home and they can teach remotely and let the kids be in person in school with maybe some young, teacher assistants who aren't paranoid nutcases, right?
Right.
So that the fact that there were other ways that would have safeguarded the children that were not even discussed by the teachers unions was a bit of a giveaway for me. And I'm like you, Megan. I have always had a very romantic view of both teachers and doctors. And that has changed forever as a result of their, I think, selfish and self-centered and wrong-headed behavior during COVID-19. As we've all said, the data was there. We knew who was vulnerable and who wasn't. And people who were demanding masking and closing schools and pouring sand on ice skating rinks and stuff. I mean, really, it was just awful. And my friend Ann Bauer and I talked about this a bit, because we did feel this kind of authoritarian thing happening with a big kind of historical ring to it. And one never talks about the Holocaust in these situations because people come hard. And it's not about the Holocaust. I don't make that analogy, but but what's similar is the run up to it in the years before the Holocaust, right? When authoritarianism was really taking over Germany. And she said that that was a feeling that she had as well. And what it was watching, and Laura Dodsworth said this to me too, that it was the authoritarianism, but it was how quickly people accepted it, right? Like we went from 0 to 60 in about 3 days. It was like, think on your neighbor. Here's a tip line, rat out the children, tape up the parks. And I was like, what are you doing? I had an event happen in my apartment building where a workman came in the early days of mask hysteria, and he was delivering something, maybe an Amazon guy. And he didn't have a mask on. And we bumped into this young woman in the building, my husband and I, and she said, look at him. Let's follow him and get his number and we'll turn him into his employer. And I was like, wait a minute, we were not doing that here. But that she was overcome, right? And so you could see historically how people can be overcome in the heat of the moment if it's driven, I think, by enough fear, right? I mean, it was a really unsettling phenomena how fragile is our connection to each other in this society, in this democracy.
Well, yeah, and so I think that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think some people are a little bit Looney Tunes and hypochondriacs and whatever, but I, for the most part, don't buy that most people were, maybe at the very, very beginning, but, not for the most part, actually fearful of COVID. Like, I don't think most people thought they were going to catch COVID and die after we started seeing that, because we could see the people around us getting COVID and not dying. We could see that it was just a cold, and in some cases a bad cold. And it was interesting to me because I left Canada to see how differently people behaved based on who they were surrounded by. And so a lot of my friends and people that I know who still are in Canada, and you're still in Canada, of course, Trish, so I'm interested in your perspective also, and Mary Lou's in New Mexico, which I think caught COVID pretty bad. If that makes any sense, maybe it doesn't, but I think they locked down pretty hard and they went pretty full on into the mask mandates in a pretty Looney Tunes way. But people bought into the vaccine mandates and the authoritarianism and the narrative surrounding the Freedom Convoy in the way that nobody that I was around here really did. And that's not to say nobody in Mexico did. Mexico's a huge place and different things happened in different places throughout Mexico. But where I was, most of the people that were around were like, whatever, this is stupid. We're going on with our lives.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to know what you guys think that was about, but also what's happening now. Like, what's your feeling around all of this in Canada and in New Mexico? Like, are people over it? Have they moved on? Are they still obsessed? Are people that still getting boosters?
I think there's a subset of the population that really believed everything they were being told and continues to believe it. And the authorities haven't given them any kind of exit ramp, right? There's been no reckoning. There's been no official declaration that, really the studies show the masks don't really make a difference, including the N95s, right? Can I just say for a second, the hoodwinking of these KN95s where you can see visible gaps around it. You would not take care of an active TB patient wearing that. Like, it's not doing anything. Air is getting in, but people haven't been given the freedom to think critically about it, and they still believe the authorities. So there's subsets of the population that are true believers. They're kind of trapped in it. The authorities aren't giving them permission to stop thinking that way, and they're getting their boosters. They're wearing their masks. They're being afraid They feel like they're going to die when the test comes back positive, even though COVID has mutated in such a beautiful way to just become an endemic, kind of in between a bad cold and a mild flu now. But I do want to circle back, Trish, to what you said about what happened in Germany. And I think it's very unfortunate that we're culturally not allowed to compare anything to that time period, because everything the Nazis did was justified under public health. This was about public health, and the perfection of the population. But the first act of the segregation of the Jews with the segregation of the train platforms was justified because they said the Jews had typhus. They told people that you'll get typhus from the Jews. And the same with the original ghettos were to protect the population from the diseases the Jews carried. And then when it's all over and all of this has been done under the Department of Health of the Nazis, with the help of all the medical profession, we have the very first International Human Rights Tribunal in the Nuremberg trials. And they come out with the very first International Human Rights Code, which is the Nuremberg Code. You read it, the entire thing says no forced or coerced medical care. That's the Nuremberg Code.
Yeah. That's interesting what you're saying, because when I did that discussion on the podcast about how far we can push the analogy, and we keep it in the run up to, you're right about the public health. And I was doing a lot of reading. I spent a lot of time reading things that I'd kind of forgotten about. Like, I knew that history, but then I got this book called, I think it's called Nazi Hygiene or Nazi Medicine or something. It's a very highly lauded book. And as I was reading the run-up, everything was about public health. Hitler was a health nut. They even had a department of bread. Like, you could only eat a certain type of proscribed healthy bread during this period. And you're right that the segregation and the demonization of the Jews was very much a public health fake, obviously, public health issue. So I was getting chills reading that and going, oh my God, are people not seeing this? Am I the only one? And that's when Anne came on my podcast, and she's Jewish, and she said she started to remember something that her parents said to her as a Jewish child, which was, choose your friends based on who would hide you in the attic.
Right.
And she was talking about the fact that a snitch line had just gone up in Minneapolis, where you can call up the governor's office and say, my friends are having a party and there's too many people there. And she, like myself, and probably you guys too, those things never can work for me. Even if it's actually a good thing, I'll say forego it, because turning people against each other in that way of snitching is never really good, right? So there were echoes of that, and it's interesting that some people are very finely tuned, and they're tuned to reject propaganda, as probably the three of us are. I'm sure we share that. I get a headache if someone's lying to me, and to really bristle at the unfairness of what they were doing. That was the basis of my depression, is I couldn't live with it. When I saw that Toronto Star page, which is now infamous around the world, it was hate speech against the unvaccinated. And I thought, and I was a legacy media journalist. That means that there was an editor there who approved it. There was a newspaper writer who put those headlines. Like, what are they doing? So I think that there are certain people, and I'm glad I'm one of them. It's a tough cross to bear, and it probably maybe is a journalism thing, or maybe because I grew up in an alcoholic household, I have an overdeveloped sense of right and wrong, as most journalists do, right? But those two things were things that I couldn't live with. And so I kind of know about myself now that when the bad man comes, I'm going to be not afraid to do what needs to be done, right? We all wonder, what will you do when the bad man comes? And I think a lot of us were tested during COVID, and I feel quite comfortable now with the idea that I could make and would make hard choices, especially to protect children, right? If it was a choice between me dying or the children dying, I'm happy to die. And the Attorney General for Texas, or a job like that, was on Tucker Carlson and said that. He said, wow, This is a disease that kills old people. I'm one. Why are we locking down kids? I'm happy to die if need be. I've had a good life. And he was excoriated for that.
Mm-hmm.
Excoriated for this noble, position, right? It's very strange.
I think that I sort of learned who would hide me in the attic in Vancouver first over the gender identity debate. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, that was reinforced now. Actually, Kim, I wanted to get to this question because I thought, this is a question from George. Sorry, we aren't getting to Kim's question just yet. Sorry, Jim, or Kim, we'll get to you. But George had asked, why does COVID mania / perma-masking often go along with being very pro-transgender, pro-trans/gender ideology? Is it just as simple as being aligned with typical leftist positions, or are there other factors that might connect the two? I mean, to me, I want to hear from you too, but to me, that connection had a lot to do with cowardice. So it was in large part about wanting to fit in and not wanting to be ostracized, not wanting to be not liked. Obviously there's threats and danger that come along with speaking out about this stuff. But I think for a lot of regular people, it was like, I don't want my friends to be mad at me. And I want to be able to pat myself in the back and, like, I'm doing the right thing. Yeah. I'm a good soldier, that kind of thing. I don't know that it was necessarily even had much to do with belief, because I have a hard time believing that many people really believed that men could become women. And because in my experience, speaking out about this issue, people would tell me privately that they thought it was crazy, but they wouldn't say so publicly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think part of it is this happened in the era of Trump, and Trump derangement syndrome is real, and I think people lined up on one side or the other. Originally, they thought Trump was going to be more laissez-faire about COVID than he was. I actually think he failed on COVID. It was a huge disappointment. But originally, there was some hope that he wasn't. And remember those early White House press conferences? The media lined up against Donald Trump and anybody who was making noises about ending the lockdown. So if Trump said ivermectin, and they said, "Oh, it's poison." If Fauci said something, they all cheered. So that was signaled very early on that if you were a good lefty, you were probably in line with Tony Fauci and public health. And there was an incident that kind of proves that in a way, that there's that doctor in Ottawa whose name is Millie or something. Nilly, her name is Nilly something, and she's quite a famous COVIDian restrictor.
Oh.
Right? Do you know what
she's
I mean?
A crazy person. This woman?
Yeah.
She seems like
yeah.
And she's like doing interviews in her mask.
Totally.
From her computer.
Like scuba gear, almost like scuba gear, right? But this is so interesting. She was on Steve Paikin's show with a couple of people of varying COVID extremist views, from not extreme to moderately, and then she, who is extreme. And the non-extreme person said something, and her response was not to argue the science or the data, but rather to accuse the person of being a Trump voter.
Right.
In the middle of a scientific debate. So that's how tribal it became. It was left, right, for sure. It was lefty and conservative and super tribal. And then Matthias Desmet also said that when he was talking about mass formation psychosis, which she might be one of, that those people who embraced it in a fulsome way were people whose lives maybe had no meaning, and that this big public effort, to save the world from COVID was a way for them to feel that they had meaning in their lives, so that they embraced it wholeheartedly. But I'm just guessing. I have no idea. I just think they were nuts and don't really understand it.
I want to get to the maid issue, just because this is one of the big reasons we wanted to bring you on. I mean, we also just wanted to have you, Trish, but I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I suppose I wonder if you two see it as connected, but for those watching who maybe aren't familiar, in Canada, medically assisted death was decriminalized in 2016, I believe. Is that right, Trish?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's happening now, and what's possibly happening in March, is that it's going to be the laws around medically assisted death in Canada are going to be expanded so that people who are struggling with mental health, mental illness, can apply to die. And, you know, the numbers of people who have been killed under MAID in Canada have exploded in recent years. Like, I think there was like 31,000. What was the number? I have it somewhere. Sorry, 31,000. There was a 31% increase in 2021. Last year, there was 13,000 Canadians who had an assisted death last year. And I mean, the idea that this would be available to people who are struggling with mental health issues, I think, is really quite terrifying, because, of course, people struggling with mental health issues might feel in 1 year that they might want to die, and then maybe the next year not. I mean, these are the kinds of things that happen with depression and when people are struggling with trauma and addiction and all sorts of other issues. Yes. But I guess I wonder if you guys think, if you guys think this is connected to socialized healthcare, like, is this sort of a Canada specific problem or a Canada healthcare system specific problem? What is this about?
Well, I think, and I probably maybe didn't think this as completely 5 minutes ago as I do now, but after kind of reviewing COVID, I feel like there is this weird connection, because Canada was a super COVIDian country, right? And the underpinnings of the COVIDian response was cruelty and dehumanization of the population. And so the MAID situation exploding here feels very, very much like a continuation of that. And the other thing that feels similar is I saw an interview in prepping for this show tonight with the main practitioner of it in this country. I think she's out in BC and she's done 400. Imagine she's killed 400 people. Ugh. And there was something about her. I'm sure she's a perfectly nice woman, but there was something about her that had the same kind of confidence as the public health people who made so many mistakes. It was almost cult-like. She had no second thoughts. She says, I know how important this is, and so I must research my cases, and I would never make a mistake on if someone should die or not. I thought, wow, we should be humble in entering into these. I mean, what a contract to enter into with another human being, that you're going to kill them. There should be some humility in that idea, and not certainty. I mean, how can you ever be certain? You need a degree of certainty, but she sounded too invested in it for me. And so I think there's a connection there. And then the other thing that wraps up the cruelty part of this is this. In doing some research before coming in here tonight, many of the cases of people wanting to die are people who can't afford to live. So there's something wrong with that. They want to die because they can't get a wheelchair ramp, or because they have long COVID and they can't work, or whatever. I mean, there's something wrong that we would offer that. If that is the reason that they're stating to be put on the list for this service, then I think we need to put the brakes on it immediately now and start over again, because that is wrong. And that says something terrible about us as a people. caring, and even if it's like, I did a film about this in about 2016, right around the time the legislation changed for Nadine Pequeneza. I was working as her production manager on it, and we had a bunch of cases. We went to Belgium where it had kind of started, and they did a case of a woman who, or we're going to do a woman who was depressed, and I think the woman backed out at the last minute, but they were having a lot of ethical problems. And the thing that bothered me, I went into that film pretty sure that I was all for it. And at the end of the film, I had changed my mind. Now I'm really not for it at all, except in very specific cases. But what I learned in seeing those stories we told in the film was that people who are dying deserve to be looked after by people who love them. And a couple of people in the film said, I'm doing this because I don't want to be a burden to my family. And I thought, really? Is that where we are now in this country, that maybe you've got some terrible, debilitating motor neuron thing, and looking after you is maybe awful? It's probably very hard work or something. But if you are cognitively aware and can feel love, and your family is prepared and wanting to walk that walk with you to death, why can't we celebrate that and say, what a wonderful gift this is for that family to be able to do it? But we don't.
Mm-hmm.
You just, I don't want to be a burden. So yeah, we'll give them a needle and end it. I mean, all of the big questions and thoughts about what it means to be human are quashed out in an instant that we start making these approvals happen very quickly on so many of these fronts where it's not clear, where we must find something to offer these people, and we must stop creating a culture and a country and a society where everybody wants to die, right? They're either using drugs or applying for MAID. Let's fix this country so we're not all so depressed or sick or unhappy that we can't go on anymore. We need to look at that in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, seem to constantly be bragging on social media about how depressed they are and how they don't want to go out and they don't want to be around people and they don't have the will to socialize, and they're grateful when plans are canceled, and it's just like they seem to have little zest for life, and maybe some of that is just exaggeration and they're being dramatic. But I mean, a lot of Gen Z and some millennials are on pills. They are on antidepressants, and they are on anti-anxiety pills, and they're on drugs for ADHD, and they believe that they can't live without these drugs. The same thing is applicable, I suppose, to the trans trend as well, where, if they can't get access to hormones, they're going to kill themselves. That this is like some kind of death sentence. Where is the sort of will to live? Where is the will to, make your life better and try to improve, rather than to just kind of lay down and die and go on drugs, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes it so frightening that Canada is opening this up to the mentally ill, because the medical establishment has so successfully branded existential angst and the human condition as a psychiatric disease, and right. The young generation has really bought that the majority of, I think we're at the point where the majority of 18 to 25-year-olds in the United States identify with a mental illness diagnosis at this point. And, if those people all now have state-assisted suicide available to them, that's an even more horrifying level of it. Where I live in New Mexico, medical assistance in dying was legalized, I think, in 2022, so relatively recently. I used to be supportive of it, and I am completely opposed to it now. I did the training when it came out as a medical provider. I was like, well, I'm just going to go and do this training. It nauseated me. I really felt so wrong in every cell of my body listening to this training. Just the cavalier discussion of you're going to murder your patient, you're going to kill your patient. They say we're just assisting, where we give them the lethal drugs and then the patient has to be able to ingest it. But like you said, Trish, it sounded very dehumanizing to me. I didn't like the choice of drugs. I find it very creepy that when I did the training, I thought they were going to be talking about giving people a combination of opiates and benzos and just suppressing the respirations, killing them with an opiate overdose. Yeah. They give barbiturates and tricyclic antidepressants, which are irreversible. Like you can't turn it off. And then morphine and Valium, and they say that the person goes peacefully to sleep, but it can take up to 3 hours for the death to occur. And you can't reverse it. So if I were to just help somebody out or help myself out of here, if I wanted to, with Ativan and morphine, if I change my mind at the last minute, I can be brought back with Narcan and some respiratory support. Like that's reversible, completely reversible. But the fact that they're using barbiturates and tricyclic antidepressants, which once the person has taken the lethal dose, there's literally no way to reverse. There's no way to turn it off. I don't know. It just feels very sinister to me. I can't put it into words of why that is so entirely disturbing to me.
Well, I think probably part of it for people like you is the idea that we've just seen parts of medicine behave very badly for the last 3.5 years. And here's the thing. The thing that Francis Collins was talking about was having a singular focus, right? We had a singular focus on viral suppression. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, bad things happened and unfortunate, right? And this is kind of the same, because if you're just like medicine, old school, should be about the whole patient globally. Remember, doctors used to come to the house and they'd say hi and they'd have a medical bag. I remember that. They knew the whole family, and it was a very global approach. There might be some religion or spiritual life thrown in, which is, in my view, not a bad thing, but I know not everybody agrees. And now it's more like, as I understand it, a little bit of kind of practicing medicine by guideline, right? So you're given a guideline. Here's the guideline for MAID. And what's missing from that is any kind of larger discussion about if it's appropriate and what does the family really want, and does the patient feel he's a burden. I mean, all of those things aren't asked. It's like, here's the drugs and here's what you do and here's how you do it, and no one's having a big discussion about it. And I remember in 2016, because of this film, that the discussion even that was had about it then was not, I didn't think it was that enlightened. I know that the people who were against it were people who had disabilities, and they were afraid that MAID, I think it was called PAD then, physician-assisted dying, and they changed the name. And they were afraid that because they were disabled and they were going to have, they were kind of needy and took a lot of resources, that they would be shipped off to have this happen, right? That was the argument. But I think, and that's a good argument if they want to make it, but I think the bigger argument about what does it say about us as a society has not been had. And we don't have those discussions anymore about the big questions. Nobody wants to talk about what this really means. People around the world are saying Canada's killing its citizens. What is this MAID thing? Wow, that's really weird. But we're just like, yeah, okay, that's what we're doing. And nobody's really having a big ethical or philosophical discussion about, except for us here now. But right, they should be.
I mean, the interesting thing about Canada and Canadians is that they seem to have no concept of what the world thinks of them, because what the world thinks of Canada is that they think that Canada is like crazy town.
Yeah.
Between all the gender identity stuff, between the COVID stuff, between how they treated the convoy, and with this MAID stuff. I mean, people around the world, Americans, like read about what's happening with MAID in Canada and are just like, what dystopia, what has Canada become? And, sorry to be rude, Canadians, I mean, I'm Canadian, but the world is laughing at us. Justin Trudeau's a joke. And they seem to still believe that they're righteous, you know?
Yeah, they do. And I think that there's something deeply and profoundly wrong with this country right now. And part of it is expressed by the fact that we cannot seem to get away from this government. We're stuck with it. I mean, that's the other thing. Think about it. Everybody I know hates this government. They hate it. And they hate that Jagmeet Singh has done this coalition. They hate it, hate it, hate it. And nothing can happen. Like, we just have to take it. I have, just down the street from here, I live in a rich neighborhood. I'm not rich. I'm rich adjacent, but there's a lot of money around here. I'm like 5 blocks from Rosedale, right? There's a church down here that has a food bank, and the lineup now is, honestly, it's around the block. It's hard to drive by it. I get so upset. And it gets bigger every week, and it gets bigger every week, and nobody's really, there's a headline in the paper about it, but nobody's really talking about what it means or what's happened. You know, I think there's a real class struggle at play right now. And it's not just the super elites, but it's the laptop class, right? It's the people who hated the truckers. It's the Peloton riding, Uber Eats ordering, reasonably highly paid people who find the rest of us annoying and don't sort of get how we live our life. And it's that kind of linear tribal thinking that approves stupid COVID policy and approves MAID policy that in any other country with a working culture of philosophical thought would be saying, well, no, we can't do that. Like, there's something really broken here. And I think I like to blame Trudeau for everything, but it's something about what his office represents right now. You know, we're kind of trapped here by this guy who is a poster boy of apparently enlightened thought. And in fact, he's the opposite of that. But I didn't mean to get political tonight, but he's really damaging this country in many, many ways. And actually, when I was so depressed during COVID, he was one of the reasons why, because I had no confidence in him being able to lead us out of it. And of course he didn't. He behaved badly by not even meeting with the truckers. And yet here we are. He's still there. You know, what do we do about that? Is this East Germany now? How do we get rid of him? We can't get when the media is all in, that leg of democracy is not functioning. You're stuck. You're trapped in this situation.
It's depressing.
I mean, I guess one of the issues surrounding MAID, I thought might be connected to the way that the Canadian healthcare system functions, because I think if you start saying that it's a right, you know, it's everybody's human right to die if they want to. Everyone has the right to access healthcare, and so MAID is part of Canadian healthcare. Then you can argue that it's discriminatory to not allow people who are mentally ill, struggling with mental health issues, access. Everybody has to have access if it's a human right.
I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I almost said if they want to die that badly, they should do it themselves, but that's ridiculous.
No, I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't think it is. I think that is the right approach. Like, suicide's not illegal, and if you want to die, kill yourself. Like, there's fentanyl on every street corner in most cities. This is about authoritarianism, and it has to be approved by the state.
The state.
Yeah. Why is that better? Like, why? It is more of the same belief system of the COVID authoritarianism. If we know what's best for you, because it's state sanctioned, it's beyond reproach. It can't be critiqued. It's sanitized. And it's terrifying. What's happening in Canada is terrible, because New Mexico's not far behind in terms of the so-called progressive policies. And I've already witnessed in my community family members strongly encouraging their dying family members to just get it over with, to just please do the assisted dying. I've also witnessed in my community, at this point, 3 people, at least peripherally that I know peripherally in my community, who were very staunch COVIDians, who had cancer during during the lockdowns who were into the snitch lines, who policed their communities because of their chronic illness. I have cancer, so you have to get vaccinated. 3 of them who, as soon as the lockdowns were over, chose medical assistance in dying.
Wow.
So terrified of death during that whole experience. And then as soon as it lifted up, and their diseases had probably progressed at that point as well, but chose to die after spending nearly three years making everyone around them miserable because we're going to kill them if we don't follow the rules. There's so much rich discussion that should be happening about this that's not.
Well, there is. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, because there is this idea too that people, if people are going to do it themselves, then maybe it's, there's always a chance they'd make a mistake and it would have a bad outcome or something, and that the state has but I just don't think the state should be killing people. I'm against capital punishment too. So even for really bad people. But before I did the film with Nadine, I did a show for the Fifth Estate on a guy named Derek Humphrey, who started the Hemlock Society. If you remember him, he wrote a book called Jean's Way. His first wife, Jean Humphrey, died or had breast cancer, wanted to die. She had gone along to this terrible state. So he made some arrangement to help her kill herself. And then he started this kill yourself kind of cult, right? With books on how to do it. And they got, like, they were all million sellers and stuff. And then he married another woman who got breast cancer, and he left her. And so we did a film about him, about Derek Humphrey, and how the people who'd been in the Hemlock Society were very cult-like in the way they viewed the right to die. And it was a bit of an expose of him. I did a very strange interview with him. And the people who kind of populated that world. And my sense of it is that there's something, like I said about the woman I saw on TV who does it out in BC, the doctor, there's something not quite right about it. I think you have to do and practice a lot of self-delusion to not have second thoughts about helping people kill themselves, right? And maybe that's what's going on, that deep down inside they're not all that comfortable. But the other thing too is that with Alzheimer's, that was a big issue in the 2016 one, because with Alzheimer's, people are kind of very aware of themselves and can make the decision. If I get to the point where I don't know my children, they do it then, right? But so what they were finding, again, I think this was Belgium, was that people with Alzheimer's can be very jolly. So they can actually pass out of their old life into the new life where they don't know their kids. They have no idea where they are, but they remember every song from high school, and they're in a really good mood, and they actually don't want to die, and they don't remember signing the document. So this presents a real ethical problem, because you're now killing a happy person who, when they were the other person, said they didn't want to die, anticipating they'd be unhappy when they had progressed through Alzheimer's. So that, I remember there were big discussions about that. And I also know Alzheimer's can be a nightmare for people, but some people are very, very jolly when they have it. And
it's ethically really tricky territory. And I don't think we should be going there as a society. I also think we don't like uncertainty. We don't like, we like to be in control. We like this illusion of control. As a midwife and a family practice provider, I see so many similarities between, like, the way we manage birth, and that we've created this, like, nightmare scenario for women where we medicalize every single thing under the illusion of we're going to make it safe. And birth outcomes have never been worse. Nobody can do it. Nobody can do it anymore. Where, my grandma had 11 kids at home in a farmhouse, and it all went fine before antibiotics and any, they were essentially the same level of technology as an unassisted home birth now. We used to be good at giving birth. Now we're terrible at it, but we pretend it's safer. The same with death. Like, we all have to do it, and we want to pretend we're in control of it. Like, we feel more comfortable about it if we medicalize it and pick the day and make it scientific and controlled. And what do we lose on both? We lose the ineffable importance of that portal that is such a huge part of humanity. These are the two universal experiences. You were born and you die. Yeah. Everything else is individual, and that we have lost the magic that can happen at a conscious birth, that anyone who's been at a nice home birth is changed by the experience. And in the same way, everyone who's been at a conscious death is changed by the experience. That precious time expands. Old hurts are forgiven. Nothing but love matters when a planned home death is happening. Enormous amounts of generational healing can happen, and it's an endangered phenomenon. It's all but gone in the West, at least in the United States, and I think now in Canada as well. And none of this that I'm saying is scientific. None of it can be quantified. And in my opinion, nothing's more important than this quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point around, we believe that we have a lot more control than we do, which is, I think, part of the reason why people might support, transhumanism, why people think that surrogacy is a great thing, why women think it would be better to have like a scheduled C-section, and, perhaps why people support MAID. Like they think, well, at least it's a choice and I have control. And I think we've been taught to not trust nature, to think that we're better than nature, to think that we can beat nature. Obviously we can change sex if we feel like it. And that, yeah, I think we don't want to think of ourselves as animals. And we have too few struggles. We have so much amazing technology that's made our lives so easy that I think we are a little bit deluded about what we actually do have control over.
Well, our lives are so easy now that our lives are they have less quality in them too, I think. But I just want to say that the what we're talking about now too is the ultimate slippery slope, right? This is slippery slope is the argument made about all new legislation coming in. Well, we have to be careful of slippery slope. And I remember in 2016, who can argue with the idea that if somebody has cancer, they're dying, they have weeks left, maybe they're in intractable pain, what can be wrong with hurrying them along the road to put them out of that awful misery and pain? We even called the film The Road to Mercy, right? That was what we thought. I know.
Yeah.
Who could be against that? Nobody. But now we're talking about some chick who's got long COVID and can't work. And there was another case too. It was also a money thing. And I'm like, so we've gone from intractable cancer pain or maybe end stage Huntington's, which is a pretty awful death. I've seen it, to mental, to unhappy and broke. I mean, that's kind of, and it's happened. I mean, it's really, so then as a society that made me, because I'm kind of a libertarian, but then I thought, well, maybe we should be giving people more money so they can not feel like wanting to kill themselves when they can't get a wheelchair ramp. I'm against universal basic income. I think it's going to make people lazy and stupid. But maybe we need another safety net of some kind so that people don't feel so trapped in their lives when they are helpless, and they seem pretty helpless, these two people, that they kill themselves.
That story, I just want to tell, I think you're referencing this story, and I just want to tell people what it's about in case they haven't seen it, because it was really a really bad story. So a Toronto woman applied, this was in the National Post, or this is where I read it in any case, in the National Post in December. A Toronto woman has applied to be euthanized under Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying program after long COVID has sapped her energy and left her unable to enjoy life's ordinary pleasures. And if you read further down through the article, it seems clear that I think what she's mostly struggling from is like mental health issues. But, she says extreme exhaustion has left her bedridden for 22 hours a day. Brain fog has increasingly made listening to music, reading, and watching movies inaccessible because she can't process the info. And what else does she say here? Oh, in a GoFundMe page created in 2021, Thompson says she was attacked by a man who gave her COVID in March 2020 as the infection was first beginning to spread in Canada. So she says, the man grabbed me, shook me, coughed in my face, and laughed. "You're sick now. I thought it was a cruel joke. I was wrong. I had contracted COVID and I never recovered." And I
just want to say there's something more to this story too. Right. There's something.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Like, that story that she tells on her GoFundMe page, I don't think is a real story. I don't think there's any way that happened.
Well,
I don't think she has long COVID
too. Yeah, I am, but there's something wrong with her that she's having trouble with.
Yeah, so. I think she's got some kind of I think she has some real serious mental health issues. She sounds like she has extreme anxiety and maybe some kind of trauma. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I don't think this is about long COVID or COVID at all. And now she's saying she wants to die because she's struggling so much with long COVID, which is, of course, something that the Canadian government would buy into, and her doctor.
Of course they would. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But there are always diagnoses for somaticized trauma and for people who have conversion disorders. So much of she could probably get made for fibromyalgia or for chronic Lyme or for candida or whatever we're calling it in whatever generation we're in, where women are suffering and they have personality issues and trauma. Often women, and it's often women that have these issues. But that story is it sums up so much of our culture. But I want to.
Can I just stop you because I love what you just said. Sorry.
Yes.
And I want to hear more about that because you touched. I said the same thing: fibromyalgia or chronic Lyme, one of these things.
Yes.
There was a documentary called Affliction or something like that where they went into all of that, and I haven't. And that used to be called Yuppie Flu.
Right.
So
right.
What is this? Is this have you made an analysis? Do you think it is a psychiatric issue or is it some other physiological thing we haven't figured out? Why does it have a different name and different, what is it?
Well, that's a huge conversation, right? For one, I want to say that the fact that we have the phrase, the mind-body connection, is itself a symptom of how messed up we are, right?
Yeah.
And that we feel distress in our bodies when we're distressed, and that anyone who's ever felt anxious knows that's a very real physical sensation. It's not in your mind, and it's a minefield to discuss this stuff. But within psychiatry and family medicine, nearly all providers acknowledge that fibromyalgia, what's called fibromyalgia now, is never seen in women who don't have complex trauma stories.
Wow.
It's just it is apparently a somaticized trauma response, which makes sense. If you're running your fight or flight response, what is that doing? It's even irritable bowel syndrome makes sense from that perspective, right? That when you go into your sympathetic nervous system, what does the gut do? It either completely stops or it evacuates everything really quickly. And if you've been running that for years in an abusive home, you grow up and that's all your gut knows how to do. And instead of helping people learn to, again, a loaded term, essentially learn to relax, learn to get the reins of their nervous system, we're medicalizing all of this and pretending none of it has to do with somaticizing a traumatic story. And now we have chronic Lyme, and it's the same group of people. It's the people who get labeled with borderline personality disorder, the people who in Freud's time had conversion disorder or nervous hysteria. It's the same presentation through history that gets a new name I'm not that old, and I've seen so many different names for it at this point.
Yeah. See, that was my intuition about it. And when I was at the Fifth Estate, we did a story debunking multiple personality disorder and satanic ritual abuse as recovered memory. And it was also the same group. So these women would go to a shrink feeling depressed, and they would come out being convinced under hypnosis that they had 102 personalities and they'd been raped by every man in their family for 50 years and had been at rituals where babies were eaten. Seriously, that's what happened, right? And it was the same borderline personality people, mostly women in their mid-20s, who were susceptible to those kind of events, right? It's a very interesting cohort.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And when
multiple
challenged, they get
personality.
very angry. And it's the same with this lot, right? If you challenge fibromyalgia people, they get angry at you.
Yeah.
People don't want to let go of these identities. It becomes who you are. It's very hard to unwind your story and find, these words are so overused now, but find agency to become the hero of your own story, to stop being a victim. It's difficult to do that process, and often there is some degree of secondary gain to being a sick person, to being someone who doesn't feel well all the time. There's so many.
Well, it's an excuse. I mean, I'm sure there's other reasons that it appeals to people as well, but people get really angry and defensive when you're skeptical about ADHD, as well as when you're skeptical about long COVID, as well as when you're skeptical about the fact that they suffer from social anxiety, and that means that they can't leave the house or be around other people. And chronic fatigue. People will get really defensive about that, and I think that it's an excuse to not be accountable in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying it's all that individual's fault, because I think that there are other issues, potentially trauma. But you have to, making change is hard. Changing your life is hard, and doing things in your life that will alleviate these symptoms or problems that you're dealing with is hard. It sucks to go to the gym. It's not fun.
Yep.
It's more fun to eat junk food than it is to eat healthy food. It's more fun to drink and take drugs than it is to wake up and go outside and go for a walk and go to the gym and try to it's hard to change your lifestyle, and that's really what you have to do in most of these cases, I think.
Yeah. And well, it's interesting in this case of long COVID too, when I first read it, because I am skeptical of long COVID, and the fact that I'm sure there's something, she's struggling clearly, but whether it's long COVID is maybe debatable, but it does seem like that's another failure of the medical system. So you've got two problems now. You've got a woman who's suffering with something, maybe misdiagnosed as long COVID, for which, well, I don't know what we do about that. So we're going to consider you for MAID. So right down the line, you've got, I always thought long COVID was a bit of a default position for the COVIDians to use when they'd lost the argument. They'd say, well, kids don't die of COVID, but they can get long COVID.
Right.
And so that would be thrown in. I was always skeptical of it, which is not to say that I don't believe this woman is struggling, but it seems to me like in this case in particular, there are a lot of failures going on here, and that her death, should she proceed with this, would be kind of a failure of our society and a tragedy there, both in a misdiagnosis and then the MAID thing and all of the rest of it.
There are plenty of people who are quadriplegics and don't want to die. There are plenty of people who have severe neuromuscular or degenerative disorders who don't want to die. The fact that she wants to die is the interesting piece. And the same with not being able to afford a wheelchair or being broke. Megan, you live in a country where lots of people can't afford a wheelchair and there are no ramps anywhere and plenty of people don't have any money. Is everybody suicidal down there?
No. And I don't want to speak for everybody here, but it's not, I don't know. It's sort of interesting and an awkward thing to say. Yeah, it's a culture where people people would not, that's not a value, like, oh, you should just lay down and die. And people are very, very family oriented here. So,
and Catholic.
And they take care of each other. Like, you take care of your parents when they get old. Everybody takes care of the kids. The whole family takes care of the kids. Like, the community takes care of people. And people have next to nothing in comparison to what people have in Canada, in a lot of areas. In Mexico, there's wealthy people in Mexico too, but those are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the poor and working class Mexicans. And people are much happier, as far as I can tell, than people are in places like Vancouver, where they seem to have lost the will to live and would rather stay home and lie on the couch and look at Netflix than go be around friends or family, or go do something healthy or useful or productive with their lives, or give back, or do something that might make them feel good in the long term. And it's really strange, because it's like people who, you could argue have more difficult lives, seem better off in a lot of ways. Which does not mean that I think that, Mexicans shouldn't be making more money than they are, of course, and have better healthcare. But, like, why are people who have so much complaining about everything constantly? Like, the people that I know in BC, again, just seem miserable. They seem so unhappy, and they hate their lives, and they're depressed, and everything's too expensive. And, like, what? Why? What's the point of having all of this stuff and all of this technology and all of this easy access to everything? And everything in your life is, you guys all look perfect, and you have these like $400 jackets to keep you warm in the winter. And what is happening? Why are you all complaining about everything all the time? And I love complaining, but I also love my life. Not that kind of complaining, not like everything is terrible, like, I hate my life. Like, I love my life. My life's great. And I make less money than all of these people do. I have way less than they do. I don't own it. I don't own anything. I don't own property. I don't own a condo. I don't have any retirement fund. Like, I don't own a vehicle. Like, what are you guys all fucking complaining about all the time? Why is everyone so miserable?
Yeah. And so that was the point I made earlier, that we live in a culture, instead of killing people, we should maybe change the culture so people don't want to kill each other. And it's really interesting that you said where she lives, which is Mexico, which is a much poorer country, I guess, in many ways, or parts of it are.
Yeah.
That the people are happier, and that they are because they live differently and they value different things, right? They live multi-generationally. I was saying to my husband tonight, I wish the kids had moved back home. I want my boys to move home. I like my boys. I'm happy when they're around, They only live a block away, but
my mother would love it if I moved back home. That would be her dream.
And so that's the big thing. Like, we kick our kids out, and we, my family lives in BC, and I'm out here and stuff. And those are not the things that make us happy. I think we're happy when we're dealing with our family and friends and staying off screens and not coveting. When I was fired from CBC in 1999, it was a huge downturn for me. I'd gone from making enormous money and having a very high profile gig to like nothing and being a real pariah. It was pretty awful. And I was pregnant, and then I had a baby as a single mom. So I was like totally broke. I mean, like, really, like, I was buying used clothing. I went from Holt Renfrew to the used clothing store. And I'm not talking about Shishi Vintage. I mean, like, the used clothing store, right? And I lived that way for about 5 years. And I did it because I made a decision. Well, first of all, I was going to get sober. So yay. But I also said I was going to live in service of my children, like the olden days, right? And so I stopped reading fashion magazines and decorating magazines, and I lived in a much smaller house in Leslieville, before Leslieville was cool. And I just was kind of a parent I had a very cloistered and small life, and I was the happiest I've ever been. I went to church. I worked in the Out of the Cold program. feeding the homeless, and I parented my kids. And I was so happy doing that. I had no man in my life either, which was really great.
Yeah,
I was single for 15 years before I got married again. So that was really smart. But I was at the poorest, I was the happiest ever. So there's a lesson in there. And it was, higher power works in strange ways. He ripped everything away, everything, and it got me sober and turned my life around in a big way. But I loved that time of my life. And oddly, I look back on that penury with real nostalgia. Yeah.
I see that so much that when you can buy the services that community has traditionally provided, you're lonelier, you're worse off psychologically.
Yeah.
When you have to take care of each other, you have community, right? And that is what gives life meaning. And I do, when you said about the Catholic nature of Canada, just as someone who for a long time thought it was this huge trauma that I'd been raised Catholic, and the older I get, the more I find value in that upbringing, even though I'm not sure I'd recommend it for another soul. But I think that understanding of the universality of suffering and the nobility of suffering, that there's an importance to it. And you don't have to be Catholic. Like, that's the foundation of Buddhism as well, that this is a realm of suffering. And if we can get right with that and understand that and align with that, then we can experience bliss. And often that comes from helping each other and caring for each other.
So I converted to Catholicism, by the way. So I envy you, because learning it is really hard. I'm still working on the Nicene Creed. I haven't got that down yet, so it's kind of a problem. But this young woman with the long COVID, I wonder how many people call her every day and say she's loved. How many friends come and knock on the door? Who is offering to live in service to her free of charge to help her with her life? Is her community doing that? Probably not.
Well, she probably doesn't have family around her. I'm just guessing, but she might have some family trauma, because it seems like this would be a situation where family should be stepping in and taking care of her. I mean, in as far as friends go, I hate to say it, but this woman doesn't sound like somebody I would want to hang around.
Right.
But I think, I mean, this is what family's for.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't, if you don't want to do it, you're supposed to still do it.
But that's what they do in Okinawa too. I talk about Okinawa a lot. That's a blue zone. And all the women, the old women who are sick of their boring, creepy old husbands, get together twice a day to hang out and look after each other. And they really look after each other, and it extends their life by decades.
Right.
And I think we have to start looking at that stuff in our culture now. I think we can't, Jordan Peterson's not going to fix it with his big fancy arc, and Matt Taibbi's not going to fix it with they're not going to fix it. We have to fix it in our communities, right?
Yeah.
And it'll likely be the women doing it because we're good at it and we like each other. And that is, I mean, it's a life extender. And I think if she's an example of somebody who needs that kind of community around her, and probably a visit or two a day from like-minded people might be enough to make life worth living for someone like that. And it's shameful that we don't know how to do it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, one of my theories about why everyone, and most people that I know back home are miserable is because I think that cities can really make people miserable because they're very isolating, ironically. Like, I think that most of what's missing, and a big part of the reason why people are struggling with so much anxiety and depression and loneliness, people are struggling with loneliness, is because they don't have community, which I think flourishes in smaller places and much less so in urban places and in cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a church thing too. I mean, it is one of the things that churches did for people. They got together every Sunday and did fellowship, and then that carried on through the week. So once everybody kind of dismissed that and moved away from their home families, as we all did, and especially I moved away when I was 20. I couldn't wait to get out of Vancouver. It was like, ugh. And so that's been blown up. We don't have that structure anymore. And that's when things like this take off. Babe takes off, right? You don't have some old auntie to come over and make you soup and make you feel better when you're lonely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And also to talk about how not that long ago, there were no antibiotics and you had 10% chance of dying every time you got strep throat. So buck up and go get your own groceries.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think like the point about simplicity, I think that it is in a lot of ways more joyful to live a simple life. And I feel like as much as I always complain about or say, you know, like I'm just a bad capitalist, I'm bad at making money, but in a lot of ways, if I'm honest, I have kept things simple intentionally because I don't want to end up in a situation where I have car payments or a mortgage, or you end up feeling like you need to keep up with all this stuff. Like it's nicer in a lot of ways and just as easy to have a small apartment and cheaper rent and to not have all these expenses for all these things that you have that then you start to feel like you need. Like and I think that that's really visible in people's lives who have these. I mean, I just can't believe how much mortgages are, you know, people who have these like disgusting condos that I would never want to. People have lives that I think are these, like it's my nightmare. Like I would never want to live in a cul-de-sac in suburbia in like a giant white house with every single new appliance in the world. And I'm like, do I want to clean this entire space? No, you pay somebody to do it. So there's another expense. And I have to drive everywhere that I go and I don't see any of my neighbors and there's nothing weird going on outside. It's just quiet and nobody's anywhere. And like, isn't this perfect? Like, it's like my hell. Like I want to live in chaos with all the roosters and I'd rather have my power went out last night. It goes out all the time. You know, it's not convenient, but I'm much happier than I ever would be in this situation that costs so much money and is supposed to be the sign that you made it. You know, this, oh, you did it. You made it. Now you have everything.
Yeah.
Hell.
Do you have roosters crowing in the morning where you are?
Oh, 24 hours a day. There's so many. Yeah, there's chickens everywhere. I don't know what
I would like that.
Like 4 a.m. Yeah, I love them. There's chickens everywhere. There's roosters everywhere. You guys probably heard the dogs start howling together all at once in the neighborhood. And, you know, it's total chaos, but I love it. And
I have a Mexican dog. She's the best. She's from Puebla.
Cute.
She lived in a shelter for 4 years. Can you imagine? Nobody wanted her.
This is my new little puppy that I've adopted. She was a foster. She was rescued from San Pancho. Mary Lou. I was like, well, she's just a foster. Emma's unhappy. Like I have another dog who's 14 and she was not interested in having another dog in the house because it's her house. But she's from San Pancho and she was living in a family and there was like 10 other dogs and then some of the dogs had puppies and she just was not getting attention at all. And she's like the sweetest, most loving little boo-boo. And then I guess the dad got sick and so they gave away all the dogs and now she's on the couch with her ears being pet and being hugged all the time. And
Mexican dogs are the absolute best.
They're sweet. Somebody in the comments, I will let you go soon. And Trish, I know it's getting late for you, but somebody asked, Gigi Gumdrop 333 asked, Trish Wood, I would like some advice on how to enter single parenthood at some point. It seems impossible financially.
Should I assume that she's leaving her husband or something? Is that what's going on there? Is that entering single parenthood?
She hasn't explained further. Gigi Gumdrop, are you leaving your husband? Or
so here's what I would say
she's just single and she wants to be a mom.
Oh, maybe. Oh, I see. Have a baby out of wedlock. Wow.
I'm not sure if it's like okay. She says not yet, but I want to. Okay, so she wants. So you have kids now, and you're leaving the husband to become a single parent.
Okay, so I would say, just to kind of elongate what I'd said earlier, that the best thing that you can do as a single mother is live within your means, don't compete, and for the first 5 years, really live in service of your kid, which isn't to say that you're raising this bratty child who's super spoiled, but I just stopped wanting to do things that would impede my ability to be a really wonderful mother. So I was doing things I didn't even think I ever wanted to do. Like when you're broke like I was, you have to be really creative about how you're going to make, his name is Truman. He's the younger of my two boys, how I was going to make Truman's life okay with no money. And one of the things I did, this is so silly, but we decided to have this thing called a bed party, right? So if something went wrong in life, we would just make a tray of dinner and go up to my bed upstairs and watch a movie in bed with a tray, right? And he loved it. And it became a huge ritual. And if he came home crying and I said, okay, bed party, he'd be like, yeah, and it's the silliest little thing, but it was our little thing. And I spent a lot of time thinking about we had slanted floors in the house like this, because it was an old Victorian house. And so we used to roll marbles down the floor. It was like a game. And we'd sit at the high end of the floor and just roll marbles down, and we'd race them and see where they're going. It didn't cost us anything. It sounds very kind of the Waltons, but that's what kids and we had dance parties in the kitchen, which single mothers all do, right? Mm-hmm. But it sounds very Waltons, but those are the small things that kids remember. They don't give a shit that they got a Ralph Lauren blazer or not. They really don't care about that. The small little things that you can do that really make a connection and make them feel like it's their thing. And the other thing I would say too is don't date for quite a while, because I really think it's hard to parent as a single parent when you've got a man in your life. They're demanding, you're distracted. I wouldn't do it. And then it's a great gift, right? Like I looked at my kids as a great gift. It was a gift. And with my first kid, I wasn't that great. I was working at CBC and pulled hither and thither. I felt like I wasn't doing enough at work and I wasn't doing enough at home, and that was really hard, and he suffered. So being single and out of work and broke was actually also a kind of a gift. And as Megan said, when you're broke like that, if you're living if you're on the spiritual beam, the money just comes. Like I didn't actually have to worry about money. I took a couple of crappy jobs that would really surprise you. I'd been such a high profile person, but I took a couple of crappy jobs on the down low just to get a bit more money coming in. But the money always found us somehow. I never felt that we were doing without. I felt like we were being held by something spiritual because we were living in that zone. So I would do it. It's really fun. And just, don't feel like you have to have a big career going at the same time. I think some people can do both. It wasn't for me. And I do think, I remember being at the dog park. I had a big Labrador and a new baby. And I would go up to the park and I would see the babies with the nannies. And the babies with the nannies weren't treated as well as the babies with the mummies. That's what I never forgot that. That's a terrible burden to lay on working moms. I'm sorry, but I think being broke and staying home is probably better.
I mean, yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I'm not a mother. I don't plan to be, but it's, there's all this rhetoric of late around how single mothers ruin kids' lives, and it's like the worst thing in the world. And, it's coming from, mostly I would say right-wing conservative men. And men who've never been mothers before. So I guess I have as much right to speak to this as they do. But like I just, in my brain, I'm like, these men have no idea how many women are in bad or abusive marriages, and that really it would be better for their kids to leave those marriages and not be role modeling toxic relationships, or have them growing up and seeing a man disrespect their mother or beat their mother or cheat on their mother or whatever. And it's not, I'm not denigrating marriage. I think it's great if a kid can have a mother and a father and like a healthy loving, stable home, but that's not the case for so many women in the world. And I think that I know lots of kids who were raised by single moms who are awesome. And so that kind of rhetoric really pisses me off.
It's so fascinating that over and over again, they blame women for men not being involved in children's lives.
Yeah.
Well, as if women are just leaving men willy-nilly. That's what they're trying to say. Oh, well, people just can't commit nowadays and it's inconvenient and it's hard, so they just leave. And I'm like, that's not what women do for the most part. Like, oh, I'm not into this. I'm out of here with my kid.
No, I was a single mother against my will. I was dumped by somebody who proposed to me, convinced me to get pregnant, and then when I did, he bailed. So, and I got fired. So it was like, ugh.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But you just roll with it, don't you, sister? We're tough. We can do it. It was great. I loved it. Screw him. It was fine.
I was a single mom with my first, and one thing it really taught me was just this, like you were saying, that spiritual safety net, that we just had everything we needed. I would have, less than $10 in my bank account, but I just trusted, and it worked out. I got really good at pulling things out of the air. I got really good at just, trusting we would be taken care of. I remember I used to make a shopping list to go to the flea market. It's like, okay, I have $20 and I need these 4 things. I would write it down. I'm going shopping at the flea market. I have no idea what's going to be there. It's random. And every single thing I would have on my list would be there, and it would all cost less than $5. That's like how much money I had. And it's just there is this, like, this is a magical realm. I know we're all living in a time of
magical realm,
hyper rationality, but it is a magical realm. And leaning on that is where so much meaning and beauty can come.
Yeah. Well, we live near Chinatown. And Chinatown has these supermarkets where you can get a couple of chicken legs and a head of broccoli for about 75 cents. No, not anymore, but it was great. So we were eating pretty well. I shopped every day with my little, small money. And then going around the corner to the house, there was a pet store, not really pets, but fish. It was an aquatic fish store. So that was the treat. It was like going to the aquarium. We would go in and look at all the fish and the crickets that he fed the reptiles and stuff. We'd spend an hour or two in there. The guy was really nice. And it was a huge ritual. And I can't think of anything that we would rather have done if we'd had more money than that. That was very fun, that ritual of going there, right? So, yeah, it was a mystical thing. I think God takes care of single mothers in a special way if you're putting a lot of effort in. I think he really gets it.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the big wigs in Catholicism was one. So
who are you talking about?
I was talking about the Divine Mother, Mary.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Whoops. God, it was just over. We said Christmas, and I've already forgotten. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, kids, like, really cheap things are a lot of fun for kids. I mean, we just went and played outside in the courtyard and dug up clay from the garden and put pennies on the railroad tracks and made forts and collected snails. I mean, those things are the fun things that I remember doing when I was a kid. I mean, you don't need all sorts of stuff. Right. I want to just ask one more question before we leave, because I told Kim earlier in the stream that I would get to her question. And so she said, it may just be me, but it really feels like there are a disproportionate number of women in power who support censorship. And she references Jacinda Ardern and Nina Jankowicz. And it's all done under the pretense of protecting marginalized communities. She says this also ties in with the recent Harvard, UPenn, and MIT presidents being called out on their hypocrisy. It really feels like our empathy is being weaponized against us. I'd like to know your and Trisha's thoughts.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yes, there is a brand of progressive women who make my skin crawl, and Jacinda Ardern is one of them. I think she's like a horrible human being. On the stuff involving the universities and Harvard and all of that, I'm kind of a free speech absolutist there, and I'm uncomfortable with what happened. I think that they performed stupidly and badly in front of Congress, but I also don't think they should have been in front of Congress either. I think that was like, it felt McCarthy-ish to me. And I think they were stupid for not being able to make the case that what was happening on campuses was not driven by anti-Semitism. I still don't think it was. I think those protests on the periphery, there were nutty people. There's nutty people at every protest. I think universities being a hotbed of protest is a good thing, even though, look, here's how free speechy I am. I hate the things that have been said to my friend Megan, and I hate the t-shirts with the hunting knives on them that these trans people dare to wear, threatening our lives. Not mine personally, but Megan and the other brave women on the front lines. I defend their right to do that. I've never said make them stop. What we are saying, I think, and Megan can correct me, is we also want to be heard. So I never said in any of the anti-racist stuff, which I also think is dangerous and stupid, I never said shut them up. I think we should get them out of schools because it's bad teaching. But I just want us to be heard. So this moment in time where anti-Semitism is being kind of weaponized, or the threat of it to shut people up on campuses and get people fired. I'm glad they were fired. I always have these complex positions. I think they should be fired. They were stupid. And I hate DEI. I think it's ridiculous. And I think postmodernism needs to go. But the idea that a bunch of billionaires can get together and have people fired, I don't like it. At free speech, you have to like it, even when people are saying stuff you abhor. That's the deal. And if you don't believe in that deal, you're not a free speecher. You're just mucking about. And I would say, go to Twitter and read a little bit of Glenn Greenwald on this. He's doing magnificent stuff all day long on this very issue, and I think he's nailing it. Anyway, that's my thought.
What do you think, Mary Lou?
Well, I'm also a free speech absolutist. I don't believe the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn are. And I think that
No.
if they had been asked in front of Congress if misgendering trans women was acceptable speech on their campus, I think they would have had a very different
Agreed.
Response.
Yeah.
Agreed. I know, it's nuts, right? Like, yeah.
I mean, I think that the trans activist issue, I mean, I've always just said, like, it's like I've never ever tried to interfere with trans activist speech or trans activist events or, trans, pride. I've never tried to shut down Drag Queen Story Hour, despite like my thoughts around what children should be exposed to in particular. But I'm not my thing is not going out to shut down events or to stop people from saying things that they want to say. I have concerns and fears around the violence that trans activists attempt to or do perpetrate on women. So that means that I want the cops to show up and protect me and the attendees. And, I mean, they're really just there to protect the property, not sometimes they protect me too. And, I do think it's crazy that I need bodyguards, but what I want is just, to be able to speak. And, women have been actively prevented from speaking on this issue for many years. It's getting better now. But it's not about stopping them from saying the crazy things that they want to say. It's that we want to speak to. And in fact, I want to have the debate. I mean, the thing that was happening for so long, and I think is probably still happening now, but to a lesser extent, was that no one would even debate us. It was no debate because, what we were saying was hate speech, and you just can't debate hate speech. And what it really was that, they didn't want to validate what we were saying, and they didn't want to have to respond to what we were saying because they don't have any good arguments in response, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, I am a free speech absolutist, but I think that I think that there is something, I mean, it was interesting because we talked about this a bit last week, but this comment was made around women being more anti-freedom than men. And I think that probably a lot of women would feel defensive around that, but I think it might be true in some ways. I think that there are a lot of women and a lot of feminists who are anti-free speech and think that, that hate speech is really harmful, and saying mean things or saying racist things or saying so-called transphobic things is genuinely so harmful that it should be stopped. And maybe that is a woman thing, and around women either being more empathetic or feeling like they should be more empathetic, being socialized to be more polite, what have you.
Or not being able to kind of sit and tolerate also these uncomfortable things, right? Like the Me Too movement, I had problems with only because I've done a lot of wrongful conviction cases, right? So I was never comfortable with believe all women. I just think that is, as an idea, that is stupid and dangerous, because of course women, like all people of all whatevers, are going to lie or make mistakes or whatever. So why can't we say believe all defendants in murder cases? I mean, you can't do that. And
Right.
and so like I'm never happy with bending the rules of the game in order to protect a group, even my own. I just don't think that ever works out. People, it's like the slippery slope, right? It's, people think, oh, we'll just do it in this group. But then it ends up being a nightmare and bad things happen to people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's this idea that women are necessarily more ethical or less likely to, I don't know, be petty, to try to destroy somebody else's lives. I mean, they go about doing that in different ways than men do, but it's not, believe all women is silly. And there was some good things that came out of Me Too, but there was a lot of men's lives who were actually destroyed during Me Too because of a crazy woman or an angry woman, like bitter at being dumped, maybe bitter at being treated badly. A lot of these guys were, I'm sure, guilty of behaving badly or being assholes.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as sexual assault.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very late for Trish, everyone. It's probably late for everybody but me. But Trish is over in Toronto, so it's later there. But thank you so much for joining us. It was so great to have you and talk to you.
So fun.
That was great.
Yeah. So for everyone tuning in, please go over to Trish's Substack to subscribe and to support her work. Again, it's really important. She's doing work that no one else is doing. And so she is at trishwood.substack.com and at www.trishwoodpodcast.com. And is on Twitter, if you can find her, at Wood Reporting.
That's where things get rowdy. Yeah, if you can find me there. But that's where I say things on Twitter I'd never say. I got to stop doing it, because then I'm like, oh, I got to go back and get rid of that. That's mean. Right?
I mean, I think that I've been really mean on Twitter lots of times. But I
saw you do one thing. I was going to send you an email and say, oh, you're being a bit too mean.
I think I just say, I think often I don't think that I'm being mean. I think that I'm just being straightforward. But when you type things, it sounds harsher than if you said it in real life, right? Like sometimes I feel that I'm just responding and it comes off as much of a mean than it is. But I'm sure I have also been mean to people. I think, and it's hard because I have a thick skin, so I sort of assume other people should have a thick skin too. But of course, it's not true.
Yeah.
And Mary Lou, of course, is also on Substack. And these links are all in the show notes down below if you're watching on YouTube. But Mary Lou is on Twitter at ML_Singleton, and she's at www.enchantedfamilymedicine.com. And her Substack is substack.com/@MaryLou Singleton. And thank you so much for everyone for tuning in and for participating in the live chat. And thank you so much for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but we tried to get through a few of them. And please like and subscribe and tune in next Wednesday. Okay, good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.